Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Word Equity Speech Stories podcast. As always, I am super excited about my guest today. We are super excited to share with you in conversation. Specifically, we're going to be talking about relationships, communication, in particular, divine connections and reconciliation. So let me welcome my guest, Rochelle Mason. How are you, Rochelle?
I am great, Dominique. How are you?
I am doing quite well. It is so great to be with you this evening. Again, excited about the conversation that we'll be sharing. So, as we're jumping in and just getting into the topics, let's actually give the people, our audience, an opportunity to just get to know a little bit more about you. Could you share a few words about what you do and all the things that you are moving forward in?
Sure. And first off, I want to say thank you so much, Dominique, for having me on your podcast. This is so awesome. You are doing so many amazing things. So a little bit about me. I am an author of a book called The Seek Challenge. It came out in 2019. And that book is all about seeking God and developing your relationship with God. And I'm also a business and ministry consultant. So, what I do is help businesses and ministries grow, start, and just really make the impact that they need to make. I love working with entrepreneurs and, in particular, faith based entrepreneurs and, of course, ministries. And so that's what I spend my time doing. And also working on another book very soon and got some other really cool things coming up as well.
Well, I am so excited, Rochelle, for the guests in the audience to hear from you today. You are doing amazing things in business and in ministry. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let's kind of just jump right into it. Considering the particular sectors that you're a part of, both ministry and business, and honestly, let's be real, ministry is a business as well. So let's kind of think about conversation. Let's think about how people show up in those particular arenas. Are you noticing a trend, or are there any observations that you could share as it relates to how people may show up kind of on the business side of things, maybe next to how people may show up in the ministry side of things? Do you see any differences, or have you made any observations in those two areas?
Um, I would say there are definitely major similarities for sure, because as you said, ministry is business in terms of its structure. It's just that ministries are more, or any nonprofit is more so focused on helping people, whereas a business is focused on making money. And
Mhm.
so I think that structural wise, they're very similar in how they operate, how they run, how they organize people. But I think some of the big differences is the love factor, I think, in ministry,
Mhm.
which I mean, that should be expected, right? You know, if you're working in
Mhm.
a ministry or serving in a ministry, you should see Jesus, you know, in people and how they interact with others. Whereas business, you know, you have people of all beliefs and you're going to deal with a lot of different things. So you may not have that same tempered speech and that same consideration of feelings and things like that in a business setting, unless it's a faith based one. But I've also seen some ministries that kind of get a little bit too far in the business side of things, where it's more
Mhm.
so kind of cutthroat, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Where it's like, you know, this is the way it is and it doesn't matter. And we're not considering anything other than this, you know, our profit or whatnot. So I've
Wow.
seen some of that, unfortunately, to cross over into the ministry world. So I think that's something that we definitely can make some adjustments in. And both sides need help with communication, though. I'll definitely
Wow.
say that.
Absolutely. You've given us so much insight, Rochelle, as to your observations, being a strategist and being someone who can go into a ministry, go into a business, and really see all of the areas that may need to show up in a certain way. So I love that you have that insight there. And then the other part I wanted to kind of just touch upon based off of what you share is the communication part. You're right. Communication is something that is definitely an area that needs to show up in a certain way in both arenas. You know, one of the stats that I recently came across is that whether we're talking about executives, educators, those who work in a particular arena, when they cite challenges and areas for growth, 86% of those individuals have said that miscommunication as it relates to, and I'm going to actually pull this stat really quickly, ineffective communication and poor collaboration are the causes for failure. So, 86% of individuals, 80%, 86% of executives, and this is corporate, 86% of educators, employees, that particular group encompassing those who have reported back as to those arenas, ineffective communication and poor collaboration. So it means a lot when we're able to show up in a certain way in conversation. It says something when we're able to speak to, the message that should go forth, whether we're going and speaking from a person to person level, whether we're talking about how we're communicating the message to the audience, how we're working as a team, even in the boardroom. Communication is something that is really very essential. And here at Word Equity Speech Stories, we consider communication as the cornerstone of strong relationships. Well, how can you build relationships? How can you engage? How can you maintain just uh, professional skills if we don't have that particular component? Is there anything that you tend to encourage when it comes to when you're working with business executives, when you're working with ministries? Is there something that you tend to encourage as it relates to communication, or how they could better promote their message when you're working with those particular individuals or companies?
Yes, absolutely. One of the major things, and that's such a good question. During in my undergrad, I majored in psychology, but
Mm,
the focus of my major was organizational and industrial psychology, which is basically how people work within a company together. And so that is a major thing. And one of the things that I love to recommend, even to my individual clients, is it's a free test you can do online.
mm,
And people love personality tests. I do,
I
definitely.
do
But
too.
it's called Color Code, and you could do it online. It's free. And basically, it breaks down different personalities. And this is something that one of the last companies that I worked with, Fortune 500 company, we did this all the time with different leaders and people in management. And you just take the test, and it tells you what you fall into, like what color, whether you're and the colors are red, blue, white, and yellow.
Mhm,
And when we got these groups together to do this survey, they learned about their personality types: the people who are leaders, the people who are more emotional, the people who are more quiet and
mhm,
reserved, people who are like fun, fun, fun. And it really opened doors to people's understanding of one another. And when they understood one another and their personality types and how they were, just as an individual, it helped them to collaborate easier.
wow.
Because, it's like, for example, the yellow personality is that fun personality. And this person is also a little bit less structured. So they
Mm,
may be the person that comes to work late, or
uh-oh.
whatever the case may be, doesn't take things as seriously, maybe as a red personality, which is that leader. More, they take those kinds of things a little bit more serious. So having that information about your group or the people that you're working with really helps you to collaborate with them more, that you have less resentment toward them when they're not doing what you think they should be doing. And just
Mhm.
overall, people learn about themselves, and then they learn about one another, and then they can kind of work together better from a place of understanding and a place of consideration, and it provides more patience for them. So I've even had my family do it. I mean, I have people in my company, when they come in and they do the questionnaire, I have them do that so that I
Mhm.
can kind of see what type of person, am I talking to, and what's the best way to communicate with them? What should I expect from them? So I think having that understanding of who you're dealing with, and even if you don't do a personality test, just basic conversation, you know what I'm saying? Like talking
Mhm.
with them and kind of finding out more about them, about their life, about their family, and just having that standpoint of love when you're talking to someone, and just interest, being more interested in them than you are yourself. And so, that brings us back to, the Bible and how God tells us to treat one another. So those are some things that I definitely recommend so that you can get the best output from your team.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that. That is so insightful, especially, I think sometimes when we show up in conversation, and I'm a speech language pathologist, and, that is something that I lean very heavily into, not just because I've studied it, but also it's something that's of interest to me. How people
Mhm.
communicate, how people show up in conversation, um, knowing like what your intentions are, understanding whether when you show up with intentions, did you actually have those intentions met by the time you left that conversation? So these are all really important factors to weigh in on. And I think it's important for us to consider something regarding what you share, a personality test, or there's a number of different things I've heard of, like the Strengths Finder, and there's so many
Mhm.
different assessments to consider doing. And I think it's something I would encourage as well, because we oftentimes consider or assess or even think we show up a certain way. And if we were to look at ourselves from a outside perspective or gain some insider perspective from another communicator, I
Mhm.
think we would oftentimes find some things that maybe show up differently than what we interpreted them as or perceived regarding how we would demonstrate a certain quality or how we intended to communicate a message. So those particular tools are very helpful. I would certainly encourage our guests and our audience to lean into that particular tool. And if you all have suggestions in the audience as to what particular tools or resources or tests or assessments that you've taken that you found helpful, we'd love to hear from you on that. We have a lot of people kind of chiming in. Thank you all for joining the conversation. Carmina, Cassandra, Adrian, Shelley, Phillips. Let's see. Rosalind, thank you all for joining today. Definitely be open to offering your feedback. Feel free to drop in any questions, any comments that you feel would be helpful as you join the conversation as well. So, yeah, Rochelle, I really think those are really powerful tools to consider, because we have those, more qualitative kind of considerations when we look at our relationships, when we look at those that we've had for, long term perspective, or we look at those relationships that we would hope to establish. Again, we see ourselves a certain way, but when we look at it from a different perspective, oftentimes there are certainly some things to gain from those interactions. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to even touch upon some other pieces. Let me see, is there anything, any approaches when you are working with a company, perhaps a company is hoping to regain a contract, or perhaps they're hoping to better establish a relationship or engage with their audience differently? Are there any particular practices other than the personality test that you would encourage companies to consider doing when they're approaching their audience, their stakeholders? What are some things you would offer in that regard?
Well, in regards to regaining trust and clientele, I would definitely say if it's a broken relationship of some sort, I would definitely recommend reaching out, and just try to reach out in a personal way. I know that we're really big in social media,
Mhm,
and all the things that have kind of gone on in our world has kind of like distanced us very much. And so, but personal touch is always the number one way to get someone's attention.
mhm,
Even if you have a way of calling your clients, and reaching out to them and kind of seeing, like, asking for their input, asking
mhm,
for, their suggestions on, becoming better and things like that. Those are always really, really good ways to kind of regain that. And just personal touches of any kind of sort, whether it's, happy birthdays, or, just different things to engage in with your customers, and not just kind of like throwing paint at the wall. Try to be as intentional as you can and as personable as you can. People really like that. And especially now, because everyone is kind of so socially distanced, people really crave personal attention and personal
mhm,
personal things. Even, some companies, I know I've done it, where even people that work with me, contractors or whatever, I'll, send them a gift for Christmas. I mean, just those little seeds of love and care make all the difference. Chick-fil-A is really good at that. They're
Oh
really
yeah.
good at, especially if you mess up, Chick-fil-A will do whatever they can to get you back.
Mhm.
Like they are amazing at that. Again, it just all flows back to love. If there's any way that you can show love to your customers, your employees, your contractors, that's going to foster loyalty in them. So I would definitely recommend that for sure.
I think that's wonderful, Rochelle. I love that you gave that feedback. I love that you mentioned personal touches. There's nothing like a handwritten sentiment or a gift card, if you will, if some people like to do that. Being able to reach out and, like you said, instead of just sending a message or an email, having a personal call. And, sometimes people feel differently about what may present as like a sales call or another pitch, but
Hmm.
engaging in such a way where if you were to reach out, if you were to, just offer something that was a little more direct and personal, I think that
Hmm.
can be well received in different ways. And then even in considering um, those relationships that we may want to reconcile, those relationships that may require some opportunities to be restored in some areas, being open to the feedback, being open to hearing from um, the individuals that you serve, hearing from those who you even work with on a team, being open to getting feedback, getting opportunities to have an open dialogue so that you are aware as to what areas may need to be mended and what role may have been played and how you may have been perceived in that conversation, even offering opportunities to clarify the message even further.
Hmm.
Sometimes how something is perceived or received is based on a person's previous experiences.
Oh, yeah.
So being able to offer just a more personal touch, a more personal opportunity to relate in a different way, I think is something
Mhm.
that I would encourage as well. So I love that you brought that up. Certainly. Absolutely. And then that love factor is definitely something that's going to reign in all things. People definitely recognize when you are genuine. They recognize when you have good intentions. They recognize when you're leading from that perspective versus just simply wanting to win them over for a sale or in business
Mhm.
or, you know, get your numbers up in ministry. So I really appreciate you bringing that particular factor because that is important. It's important. It's an important message to communicate in
Mhm.
general. Is something that should show up in how you communicate with others. We, as parents, even or educators or um, maternal, paternal figures, we teach our kiddos, whether you are their parent or whether you are just a mentor figure, you teach them certain values and virtues as it relates to how to communicate with others and how to mend a situation when a wrongdoing happens. So being able
Mhm.
to own your part, being able to honor what you said, being able to show up in a way that demonstrates love first, I think is such an important piece to lean
Oh
into.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I would
Awesome. Mhm.
add something to that too, Dominique. I was thinking about even with your personal relationships, it's a lot of the same sentiment in terms of reaching out and showing love. And I think in personal relationships, we have a tendency to kind of glaze over when
Mm,
we do something wrong. And we're like, oh, they'll get over it, or just kind of ignore. And
yes.
I want to mention something about this because when you were talking, it made me think about those personal relationships. And it's really important. And all, most people are very intuitive, and you kind of can pick up other people's cues. Like maybe if you
Mm,
said something or did something that may have offended them. And I think that unfortunately nowadays, we're all very, not all, but in many cases, we're very self focused, and
mm,
we're very interested in kind of standing our ground and appearing strong and appearing resolute, so much so that we don't recognize when our attitude affects someone else negatively.
mhm.
And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong,
Right.
it's just if is this going to hinder our relationship, or is this going to cause some type of strife between us?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example.
Absolutely.
Like, I have a family member, and I was talking to them on the phone, and I was in some type of mood, and I said something, nothing, blatantly mean, but it was just the way I said it.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got off the phone with him, I just had this, like, I'll call it a check in my spirit,
Okay.
right? I just had this feeling like, maybe did I hurt them? Did I say something that didn't, sit right with them? But I kind of ignored it. And then I talked to the person several times after that, and they didn't say anything. They had the same attitude toward me. Everything was fine. And then it just kept nagging at me like, I think I did something or I said
Mm-hmm.
something. And so one day I just asked, I said, hey, when we were on the phone the other day, when I said this and this to you, did it hurt you or did it bother you? And they said, yes, it did. It really hurt me.
Okay. Wow.
And a lot of people are not very bold to say, hey, that was inappropriate what you said, or don't talk to me that way, or what have you. But it didn't matter. I knew, by the grace of God, the Holy Spirit speaking, that I had offended this person.
Mm-hmm.
So I went ahead and, explained. I was like, hey, I'm so sorry about that. I didn't mean, I wanted to check to see if I did, make that mistake. And then I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way. And I
Mm-hmm.
apologize. And I think a lot of, especially those of us who are Christians, we get that check,
Right.
hopefully.
We're
And
hoping.
when we get it, we should respond to that. We should,
Mhm.
go and try to mend that bridge, because many people are not, like I said, as vocal, and they'll just let it ride. And then, but it'll build up on the inside of them and could turn into resentment, and
Right.
things like that, unforgiveness. And so, and then after a while, they just kind of blow up if it happens too many times. So
Right.
I think that we can all grow in our sensitivity to
Mhm.
others, and also being able to say, hey, that hurt my feelings, or that, made me feel uncomfortable when you said this or did that. We need to tell each other the truth.
Mm.
And that's something else that really can help with resolving conflicts, or helping with reconciliation and things of that nature.
Wow, Rochelle, I'm so glad that you brought that up because, we started the conversation in the realm of business and ministry. But when we're talking about relationships, whether it's professional or personal, that particular factor of communication and how we're able to consider our word choice or consider our tone or be open to, you talked about that, like that spirit check, whether you call it being nudged by the Holy Spirit, or whether you look at it as something that you just felt in your spirit, or I just kind of was compelled to do this. We don't have to wait for this big booming voice, or we
Hmm.
don't have to wait for a situation where someone feels like their response is only to blow up or only to cause a ruckus or have a major reaction when things really could have been resolved at a different level. So being open to those promptings, being open to what you feel is right. And guess what? It's better to ask the question and be open to the fact that maybe that person didn't think a second thought about what was said, but at least you opened the door for the conversation. So there was clarity. So there was an opportunity. If there was something necessary to be shared, there was an opportunity for it to be shared. Because who knows if that particular individual would have actually come to you? Who knows if they would have had, if you would have had another interaction that lended itself to it really, as you talked about, compiling and building up and then turning into something more major had you not taken the step to reach out and just position yourself in such a way that would allow you to demonstrate empathy, demonstrate understanding, offer an opportunity to seek forgiveness for something, whether it was intentional or not. Sometimes we don't intend to rub someone the wrong way, so to speak, or we don't intend to create a conflict, but perhaps because of a difference in communication style, or perhaps a difference in experiences or just the nature in which we communicate with one another, it can easily lend itself to misunderstanding. So to be able to just put everything out there and take an opportunity to just confront the situation before it became something much greater, I really commend you for that. And I would strongly encourage those who are listening, whether you're live or whether you are going to be listening through the replay, really consider those opportunities. I think we know it, Rochelle, more than we would like to admit. So just taking those opportunities, whether it be a professional relationship or a personal relationship, um, taking those steps is really important.
And we also, I think earlier we were talking about the whole thing of cancel culture and blocking people. And, you know, and I wanted to just ask you, Dominic, your thoughts on this. Like, why do you think, um, most of the time, if we have an issue with someone, the first thing we do is block. The
Mm.
first thing we do is cancel. That's the first thing.
Right,
Why is
right.
that the first thing?
That's a good question, Rochelle. Honestly, I think it presents as the easiest way. You pretty much block, okay, so I don't have to deal with you, cancel you out, block you out. I'm done. I'm over it. But have you really resolved the issue? Have you really gotten to the root of what needed to be discussed? Have you considered all of the factors that may have contributed to how you even got to that place? So I think the reactive, most immediate way in which some people may choose to operate, which is to block or cancel. Um, it seems like the easy solution, right? But if you notice over time, if you really examine your relationships, if you really examine the circle of individuals that you have surrounded yourself with, you may want to kind of consider, is there a pattern? Is there a pattern where my longtime relationships are, no longer present? Or is there a pattern in, maybe my relationships don't go past a certain point? Um, just really examine. And it's really an opportunity to be very reflective, whether there's something that you need to consider on your end, whether it be your approach or whether it be something to better monitor, or whether you need to consider how you're communicating. Are you asking for what you need? Are you being open and honest about those things that are meaningful to you, what you value? Are you attracting people in a way where they know right up front what you stand for and what you won't stand for? So
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think that's the easy route rather than having the conversation and owning your part, or having the conversation and having to really share with someone directly, hey, that really hurt me. It's really challenging, I believe, for people more times than not to be open about a hurt or a wrongdoing, or be open about how to tell someone about themselves and in a respectful way. It doesn't have to be something that turns into a major conflict, but being
mhm,
able to have an atmosphere that is set, picking a time that you think would be reasonable. Whether this is, and I've talked to even teenagers about this, when they're communicating with their parents or communicating with a peer, having an opportunity to consider, what are you bringing to the table? What are your hopes? What are your desires? How do you want to lead this conversation? What do you
mhm.
intend to achieve by the time you finish this conversation and this dialogue? So being able to consider what's meaningful to you, being open to the possibilities that, someone may receive you well. Sometimes they may need a little more time to process, but at least you had an opportunity to share respectfully, consider, what things you may need to be open to hearing from those individuals. And just, having the atmosphere set in such a way where the space is safe, the atmosphere is set in such a way where you both have heard, hopefully, if you're believers, heard from the Lord as to what is most important to be shared, and be open to the resolution and the outcomes. That's just my take on it. Maybe you have some other thoughts to share, Rochelle, but that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. You're completely right. And I think it comes with to be able to do that, it takes maturity. It takes
Mm,
maturity. It takes the ability to handle your own emotions,
mhm.
and just that open mindedness to say, hey, maybe I'm not 100% right about everything.
Wow.
And even when we're in business relationships, that ability to communicate is so vital, because our
Mhm.
personal relationships kind of trickle into every other area of our lives. And if we can't handle um, if we can't handle those personal relationships, business relationships are going to be difficult.
Wow.
And I'll give you a quick example of that.
Absolutely.
So we had one company I worked with. We had some issues with some employees, and so we developed a conflict resolution process,
Mhm.
because and my thought behind that was, trying to avoid write ups and things like that, because these people, weren't able to communicate with each other. And then it would
Mm,
get kind of heated, and then, emotions would take over. And then now we're in a place of just not being, in a mature place. And so
mhm,
it was interesting to me. The very first one that we did, it was so difficult for the two individuals, because both of them were very emotional during the conversation. And it was
mm.
it was difficult because and listening skills was not present.
Okay.
And so I think that those two things are so major, especially listening skills.
Absolutely.
Um, and there's something called reflective listening, where you actually close your mouth and you just let the person say what they need to say, and you just, process it,
Mhm.
and maybe even repeat it back to them to make sure that you hear them clear. Because as we mentioned earlier, misunderstandings is a big issue, because I'm hearing something different than what you're saying.
Right. Absolutely.
Or better yet, I'm trying to figure out what my comeback is going to be while you're talking.
That's
So
the one, right?
it's like, yeah. So, those, and it was so interesting for me to see, like, these two people just, they're having such a hard times, and it's not necessarily with the other person, but they're having a hard times with themselves, keeping
Mm,
themselves under control.
right.
And so, with more practice, that process got, easier. But it helped the two individuals kind of learn about themselves, like where they individually needed to become better communicators. And communicating is not just talking, it's also listening, as we mentioned.
I love that you shared that piece. When we think about communication, it's easy to think, okay, I've been speaking since I was 2 or 3, or I've been speaking for a long time. Surely, I'm accomplished in this area, or, I've excelled and elevated in this particular area. But when you really look at the full picture, I think there's opportunities to do those check ins, have multiple checkpoints, have opportunities for there to be some kind of accountability system, especially when you're dealing with business or ministry. But we should really honestly treat those particular arenas. We should treat our personal in that same way. We should have checkpoints. We should have
Mhm.
accountability. We should have different systems in place that allow us to really consider how we show up in communication, how we show up in conversations. So thinking about the listening factor, if you really watch a conversation, it's, if you're friends that have known each other for a long time, you may be those friends that just finish each other's sentences or interject often. That may be just a part of your dynamic. But when you're thinking about individuals who may not know each other in that same way, or just establishing a relationship, or even having a very um, critical conversation, those interjections are really not all as well placed in that particular situation as maybe it would if you're just family and you guys are just having a good time and everyone's just kind of talking on top of each other. Even that has to be considered in different arenas. Um, but just thinking about that listening piece, and listening for understanding, not listening to discern what your next rebuttal is going to be, or not listening so that you can know what your, as you said, your comeback is going to be, but really being open to hearing the individual, so you're listening to what is said and you're gaining clarity as to the message that's being communicated, listening for the tone and all of those things, but really trying to hear what is being stated. and listening with ears that are open to the possibilities of what is trying to be communicated. Not just listening from, well, this experience happened and this is how I feel about that, or, kind of pulling out all of these different things, really trying to take an opportunity to just hear and listen to what is being shared in that particular exchange. So you can just really get the full message, the full clarity of the message. So I love that you brought that up. And it's honestly a skill that we think as adults that we've mastered. We would hope to have mastered those particular skills, but it's certainly something I would say in observing conversations and, sitting with clients and families and just working through different systems. You'd be surprised how many opportunities there are to be much more reflective, really assess where each person may be as far as their maturity in that particular area of growth concerning their communications. Because there's so many different dynamics. There's so many factors to consider. We think it's just speaking and, sharing a message, but there's so many different things that show up in conversation. Our values show up when we speak. Our story, our message shows up when we speak. Our experiences show up when we speak. There's so many different things that come into play when we have a single exchange. So being able to both represent that in a way that is authentic and also represent that in a way that is meaningful and best representative of what you would hope to communicate. So all of those different things come into play. I'm so glad that you brought, I like practical examples. I love that you have all these stories to share and examples as well. And I'm going to check in on the chat box just to make sure we didn't miss anyone. Again, you all feel free to jump in, maybe share any insights, anything that you feel like really stood out to you as far as what has been communicated already. Any questions that you may have, definitely feel free to ask those. One of the other things I wanted to find out, Rochelle, is I'm wondering if you found anything. So we talked about active listening or different listening styles. We talked about being able to state your intentions clearly, being able to confront a situation when you get that prompting or nudge from the Holy Spirit, that kind of personal check-in. Are there any things that you noticed that you found to be helpful when someone is hoping to establish a relationship, particularly really kind of establishing a relationship with the Lord? Because we talked about different things that could present. Now, we were talking about this previously, but when we're thinking about just this conversation that is to be had now, we were talking about ways that we may assign certain things in different places, whether we think of an experience that we've had, and based on that experience, we may assign that wrongdoing to the Lord, or we may feel like we've got into a place in our relationship and we may feel as though we need to reestablish a relationship with the Lord, or we've considered just different dynamics and different ways that we show up, and we just really are seeking to create a better line of communication or better way in which we would like to demonstrate ourselves. Can you give any kind of helpful, like practical tools if someone wants to really just more fully immerse themselves in the development of their personal relationship, spiritual relationship, Christian relationship? What are some things you could offer in that regard?
That's a great question, Dominique. I think that in light of everything that we've talked about, I think that a relationship with God is your other relationships are going to be a reflection of that.
Mm,
And, because God is our creator, and he created the whole concept of relationships. Like, think of
mhm,
that. And our relationship with him is what's going to cause us to get that love and that compassion, that patience that we need to interact with the people around us. But if that relationship is broken or not established or not maturing and growing like every relationship should, that's going to create some roadblocks in life in general. So,
mm,
as far as establishing your relationship with God, it's really so much easier than people think.
mhm.
And it starts off with a conversation.
Okay.
It literally starts out, if you just thumb through the whole Bible, it's really all about people having conversations with God,
Mhm.
them talking to him talking back, them doing something crazy wild that he told them to do, and then the world around them just changing for the better. And
Mhm.
it really starts with just talking. And so if there's some, and one of the things I love about God is he's an amazing listener. And I
Mhm.
think that he created us in a way to kind of show us how to have a good relationship. And if you notice, and this is the simplest thing in the world, but like he literally gave us two ears and one mouth. And I was talking to my mom the other day and I said, Mom, what if he gave us two mouths and one ear? Like what?
Mhm.
He didn't, for a reason, right?
Right.
And so if you sit and talk to God, he's going to listen. He's literally going to listen. And then we listen, we get quiet, and we give him an opportunity to speak.
Mhm.
You can, if you're a born again believer, you can hear him. I mean, even people that aren't born again can hear, you know, and
Mhm.
it's like it's a matter of, just being open to that. And so I think that just starting that conversation, and it doesn't have to be anything deep, starting out, hey God, I need help with this. I feel this, I feel that.
Mhm.
I'm feeling depressed today. I need your help. Like, what do you want? Just talk, just pour your heart out and then sit and listen. Give him an
Mm.
opportunity to speak and he will speak. You can even say, God, I'm not confident in my ability to hear. Help me to hear.
Mhm.
He'll help you to hear. I mean, it's really the big thing is you have to go in there with some faith, you know, and just
Absolutely.
believe that God is real, that He's listening to you, and just watch amazing things happen. And that's what my book, The Seek Challenge, is about. It's about taking 21 days. And the significance of 21 days is, many psychologists say that that's how you form a habit in 21
Yes,
days. And of
absolutely.
course, longer if you want to do that. But just taking that time to on purpose and intentionally spending, even if it's just 5 minutes, talking to God about your day, about what's going on with you, just like you would talk to a friend, and
Mhm.
then sitting quietly and just allowing him to speak to you. And he speaks in many different ways. It just may be, a sensing of something, or you may actually hear his voice on the inside. You may get a message through all kinds of things, and then you just write down what you believe he said. And that's really how it works. And like, as I mentioned, all throughout the Bible, it's just people talking to God, listening, and then he talks back. And then for those who may have a situation where maybe their relationship with God, for whatever reason, was broken
Mhm.
or hurt, or maybe someone who represented God to you disappointed you, it's, in all honesty, it's really unfair to assign someone else's actions to God
Mm.
because he gives all of us free will, right?
Absolutely.
So we have the ability to do whatever we want, all of us. So he just gives us instruction. He says, "Hey, this is the right path. Walk down this path." And if that person doesn't, they choose not to. But that's not God's fault, you know. And so if we have a situation where someone hurt us that represented God, or like we talk about church hurt and things like that, that's not His fault.
Mhm.
Okay. Or even if something happens that disappoints us and we become angry at God, you know how you fix that? Conversation. But see, we talked about, like, we like to do the cancel culture on everybody. you
Right,
know,
right,
I got
exactly.
this didn't happen. This man told me this was supposed to happen. They say he was a preacher and it didn't happen. Or, someone dear to me passed and I was praying and praying and nothing happened. And, so we get mad at God. Well, guess what? Talk to him.
Mhm.
That's how you get understanding. That's how you get peace. That's how you get what you need, is by talking to him. Because if you cut him off, guess what? The relationship is not repaired. Some of us need to just reconcile with God. And that's okay. God can handle your anger. He
Right.
can. He can handle you yelling, screaming, getting mad, crying, rolling on the floor. He'll be right there with
Mhm.
you. So everything starts with a conversation. And a listening ear.
Absolutely. I love that you made it so practical because I know we started the conversation about business and being that you are such an expert in your field as it relates to working with companies and working with businesses and also working with ministries. Our primary focus today was to also talk about that divine connection and reconciliation. So the fact that we've been able to think about and discuss both the professional side and the personal side, if you are a believer, if you're someone that's interested in gaining more inside information as to how you can build or establish that relationship, it's definitely something that is available to you. So being able to, liken that relationship with God to a conversation, I love that particular feature is something that is just a thread throughout everything. Communication being the cornerstone of strong relationships, and that does not exclude our creator as well. So, and again, I want to make sure that I honor, the fact that I am a respecter of other people's faith. So if you have a different belief system, this conversation is still available to you. This is something that we still want you to be able to chime in. We can only speak from our particular personal perspective and relationship, but certainly understanding that is something that is respected as well. But I appreciate that you again made that such a practical opportunity because when we think about different situations, I even think about again as a communication sciences professional, some cultures may consider any kind of communication difference as a gift from God. Some cultures may consider a communication difference as a disorder or a communication difference as something that was a curse from God. So it's so interesting how even in different cultures, how we communicate about differences, how we communicate about different features and factors, how we may communicate within our relationships about different things that may show up. So it's so important that we're able to, be aware and also speak to those particular factors as well. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I took the Seek Challenge. I would highly encourage, those who have not yet, definitely jump onto Amazon, look Rochelle Mason up, look up her book, The Seek Challenge. And like you said, it's 21 days. That's very manageable. Speaking about psychology, being able to create a strong habit. We create lots of different habits around so many different things, but certainly being able to um, consider how we are establishing or reconfirming or building our relationship from a personal perspective and how that does very easily show up in all the different relationships that we maintain or establish. So that is so key. And I wanted to thank those who are jumping into the chat and sharing their insights as to the process and from a business perspective and being in corporate America and how it's important to consider those guidelines and policies when you're thinking about effective communication. So thank you all for jumping in with that as well. And we're going to definitely make sure we hit on all of the different areas. But I definitely appreciate, Rochelle, that you've been able to share so much insight, not just on the business side, not just the professional side, but definitely that personal relationship as well. Are there any additional takeaways that you would have our guests to lean into as they are considering their professional and personal relationships? Are there any other things you want to add?
Um, I would say, just as we spoke about today, just remembering to just make sure that you listen as twice as much as you talk,
Mm,
and that will help. That's a life changer all by itself. If you just decide to do nothing else but say, okay, when I'm in conversations with people, I'm going to listen. I'm just going to
mhm,
listen, and then, really give them my full attention and just hear, what's going to say. Because that, when you hear and then ask those, questions to make sure you have complete understanding of what they're trying to communicate,
mhm.
then that is going to help to avoid so much drama, conflict, and just, give people a chance.
Oops,
Let's stop
absolutely.
blocking each other and stuff. I haven't been blocked, just in case you're wondering. But I just think that I'm just like, I really feel like that's just a hindrance to us because we're eventually going to have to cross some of those bridges. And, like many of us have probably heard in the past, don't burn your bridges because you
Mm.
never know when you'll have to cross them again.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that. And just to add to what you shared, I would encourage our audience and our listeners, those who are, just examining their personal relationships, examining their professional relationships, to just be open to having the conversation. Whether it's one that's challenging, whether it's one that that has been maybe perhaps a long time coming, be willing to just be open, be willing to sit down, create that safe space, enter the conversation with some clear intentions and make sure those intentions are met. Make sure that you are able to walk out of the conversation having accomplished and achieved what you went in to have. Have completed. So definitely, I would encourage that. I would definitely encourage some of the things that you shared to just be open to listening so that you can really get the full clarity of the message and take opportunities to really self-examine and self-reflect and take those opportunities even with some of the assessments that were mentioned, some of the personality tests that were mentioned, so that you can get more information as to perhaps how you show up in conversation. So, Rochelle, if you'd be open to sharing with the audience how they can reach out to you, how can they better connect with you, we'd love to get that information from you.
Yes. Well, if social media, everything is Rochelle D. Mason. It's on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also, you can visit my website, theaccomplishgroup.com, if you're interested in consulting for your business or your ministry. If you're trying to start a business or ministry, you're trying to grow it, that's what I
Mhm.
do.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And thank you all for leaning into the conversation today. I would encourage you to continue to follow our conversations. If you go onto YouTube and search Word Equity Speech Stories, you're able to find the replay of this conversation as well as previous guests. Um, Definitely feel free to find me on Instagram at dom.knd. Find me on Facebook at Dominique KND. Our website is word-equity.com, or you can type in dominiquekennedy.com. Again, thank you all for joining. Thank you for your feedback and comments, and we look forward to sharing with you in a future time. Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Bye bye now.